This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Limited Run.
Mission 1, start!
Metal SLug 3 and Metal SLug X are great, no denying that, and more slug is always a good thing. Metal SLug XX is a side-scrolling run-and-gunner by SNK Playmore. Originally released to the Nintendo DS in 2008 as Metal SLug 7, Metal SLug XX does for 7 what the original X did for Metal SLug 2. First released to the PlayStation Portable in 2009, XX upgrades and enhances 7 in great ways. It has also made its way to many other platforms, including, in this case, the PlayStation 4. So what does it do differently? What carries over? And how does it compare to the series' earlier greats? Let's take a closer look. If you've played any other Metal Slug game in any capacity at any point in the series' history, there's a good chance you'll get the basics of what's going on in this game as well. Generally speaking, Metal Slug uses a 3-button setup and 8-way digital control, allowing players to run and gun their way through several stages of chaotic action with guns blazing and grenades popping. One button handles jumping, another the player's current weapon, and the third chucks out a grenade for heavy damage. However, XX also features additional controls, which we'll talk about shortly. Metal SLug XX on PlayStation features 7 playable characters right out of the gates. The PF Squad's Marco and Tarma and Sparrow's Eri and Fio make their returns, with Metal SLug 6's Ralph and Clark reprising the roles as part of the Ikari team. The previously DLC-only Leona is also included and immediately present, filling out the roster. In most Metal Slug games, all characters more or less behaved and performed identically, with only cosmetic differences between them. But starting with Metal Slug 6, each would have special abilities and attributes. The differences between all 7 of these characters makes for a much more diverse setup, accommodating many different playstyles, and in the case of 2-player co-op, adding a hefty dose of strategy to the mix for players with different strengths. Eri, for example, holds twice as many grenades, while Tarma gets extra attack power and boosted pickups while riding a slug. Many characters also have alternate melee attacks and special abilities which can be activated with special button combinations. However, using these abilities takes effort and planning, something that may not work especially well for reasons we'll get into shortly. As is the case with every other Metal Slug game, there are all kinds of extreme, powerful weapons to be found and equipped by rescuing POWs and destroying crates. Only one new weapon, the Thundershot, was added to this chapter of the series, but it's super powerful and a lot of fun to use, though it's a pretty rarely occurring weapon. Players can also aim most weapons in 4 directions while on foot or jumping, with some special weapons, like the heavy machine gun or laser gun, firing along an arc as it happens, thus covering more area. As always, pickups to replenish special weapons ammo and grenades are also present, as well as the powerful firebomb grenade variant. But here's where things get a little more interesting. Metal Slug 6 introduced the ability to hold and switch between 2 collected weapons at once, a feature which was carried over to 7 and by extension XX. Switching between them is as simple as pressing the R1 button on a PlayStation pad, but care should be taken. The weapon in reserve will be replaced by the next weapon picked up, with the weapon previously in use going into reserve. If that sounds complicated, well, that's because it kind of is, because unfortunately it's not at all intuitive, as this system will frequently bump out a weapon we were saving for later. Simply replacing whatever is in use rather than the reserve is, kind of how it should work, duh. On the Slug side of things, the Special Vehicle 1 and Slugnoid make returns, but Metal Slug XX also features a number of new slugs, like the Slug Truck, Ostrich Slug, Slug Armor, and this absolute unit. Each has various strengths, weaknesses, and abilities, with some being more useful than others. Like we saw in Metal Slug X, Metal Slug XX takes a previous game in the series, tunes it up, and adds extra features, and generally makes it better. In this case, the game in question is, of course, Metal Slug 7. 7 was a single-player only affair, but XX fixes this with the inclusion of a 2-player co-op mode. Enemies are generally more resilient in this mode, making things more challenging and making teamwork and a good balance between chosen characters even more crucial. XX even adds new branching paths throughout the game, similar to Metal Slug 3, complete with new prisoners to rescue and enemies to take on. It's a great new twist to the vanilla Metal Slug 7 experience. Leona was also not present in Metal Slug 7 at all. For those looking for an extra challenge, and a mode that allows for practicing some of the trickier sections of the game, a reworked combat school makes its return, giving Slug fans even more to do. Additionally, the main campaign also features a stage select, allowing players to start the game on any cleared stage for practice or progression. For those that need a helping hand, beginner mode switches out the basic pistol with an unlimited heavy machine gun, and enemies have less health. This only mitigates the difficulty so much though. For those that somehow want even more punishment, a hard mode also exists. Regardless of which is chosen though, all modes are extremely difficult. All of this sounds pretty good, but we had a few issues with Metal SLug XX, and it mostly came from the general level design and layout. We found that, especially in some later stages, we would end up dying in pretty unreasonable ways. Really stupid things like slow scroll, cheap enemy placement, imbalanced, spongy enemy health, and most infuriatingly, pitfall kills when the floor is only just off screen. What the hell is that? But we've got to say, the most bothersome thing about Metal SLug XX's design is the overwhelming amount of enemies regardless of the chosen difficulty. Especially in later stages, there's just so much going on. The vast majority of players are likely to chew through credit after frustrating credit. Even the slugs don't last very long, with so much bullshit pelting them almost constantly. Some slugs are also open to way too many attacks without adequate defense, especially those with fragile, easily destructible add-ons like the slug truck. All of these factors add a thick layer of frustration to the overall experience. Thankfully, most can be overcome with simple memorization, but not everything. The worst part of it all, though, is Metal SLug XX's two-player mode. While the controls in general feel good and responsive in single-player, there's a very noticeable input delay when two players are playing at once, making progress even more difficult without constant death. Two-player Metal SLug is always an awesome time. Just look at Metal SLug X. But, at least on PlayStation 4, XX borders on unplayable with Player 2 in tow. That's a rotten shame. On the whole though, well, we really want to say that Metal SLug XX is fun, and to an extent, it is. But its issues leave us wondering if this is really as good as we had thought over the years. But what's up with the difficulty here? Metal SLug 7 and XX were never arcade releases, and while overwhelmingly hard games were a good way to generate revenue from quarters back in the day, they don't really fare so well in a home release setting. The need to overwhelm the player like XX does just seems a little petty. Ultimately, it devolves pretty quickly after Stage 3 and ends up not being as fun as others we've played. It's also not especially groundbreaking in general, as all of its biggest features just piggyback off of Metal SLug 6, one of the least well-received releases in the series, or so it seems. For series fans though, XX is still probably a worthwhile entry, at least it was for us, and there are definitely still worse ones in the series. Scoring in Metal SLug XX is a little more involved than the games we've taken a look at in the series so far, though the new scoring elements in XX are also fully present in Metal SLug 6 and 7 as well. Obviously, enemy destruction is going to be a very big part of the player's score, and completing a stage with as many POWs as possible in tow, and hopefully an intact slug for a significant bonus, is as slug players might expect. Of course, as is typically the case, dying will forfeit all rescued POWs, so care should obviously be taken. Also present are all of the random items like bones, food, snakes, and so forth left behind by rescued POWs or hidden in various parts of the stage. The thing that stands out with Metal SLug 6, 7, and XX is the abundance of coins that are dropped by defeated enemies. As with other titles, collecting these coins in rapid succession will mount their value from 10 points all the way up to a maximum of 6,400 apiece, adding a decent chunk to the player's score. But it goes further. Weapon impacts with scenery or enemy units will build a set of gauges in the bottom corner of each player's side of the screen. These gauges can be built faster the more powerful the player's weapon is, and will add a multiplier to enemy and machinery kills to a maximum of 16 times. When it hits maximum, the gauges will flash and deplete, maintaining the 16 times multiplier as it does so. The amount of coins dropped is also tied to this gauge. As is the case with the rest of the series, there are no extends in Metal SLug XX, and the player score is maintained through continuing the game at game over. There is a small semi-competitive layer to it when playing a co-op session, though. There are no online leaderboards in Metal SLug XX, but a local leaderboard is still available. As with previous entries, an emphasis on how many continues are used almost supersedes the actual score. But, of course, a no-miss is going to yield the most points on POW rescue and slug preservation alone.
2, start!
Metal SLug XX's presentation is decent for the most part, but it has its issues. For one, the Super Eagle-style imagery at the main menu and combat school don't exactly feel especially Metal Slug. It's all just a bit cheap. This is even more evident with the combat school. Take a look at Metal SLug X's imagery for drill instructor Margaret, for example. Now XX's Cynthia. I'll take choice number 1 for all of the money, Alex. Thankfully, the game proper has all of the chunky yet ultra-detailed, well-animated, sometimes needlessly but satisfyingly gory rawness any good slug worth its shotgun employs. Meanwhile, the sound and music here is all pure slug. From the title logo to the main menu to the stages themselves, XX's music does the job, and it does it in fantastic ways, especially in Stage 2. Exquisite. Guns, explosions, missiles, slugs, characters, and enemies all sound as they should, though a new announcer loses a little something with his delivery of the iconic heavy machine gun and rocket launcher clips. Still, it's clean, well delivered, not at all terrible actually, and at least gives XX a little more of its own personality. While the game maintains a 4:3 aspect ratio, options exist for a larger screen fill, a smaller, sharper mode, or a full widescreen stretch for the heathens out there that somehow like this kind of thing. You know who you are, shame on you. Nah, I'm obviously kidding, but the empty space can be handled in a few different ways, only one of which is any good. That's right, simple black sidebars, because what the heck is up with this weird faded screen edge? No thank you, get out of here with that. Multiple scanline options also exist, but for us, it's thick picks or bust. None of that filter stuff either. I want squares so sharp they'll slice my fingers off. XX's menus are easy enough to follow with a hassle-free yet engaging layout. Options for various sound and visual tweaks as well as control rebinding also exist, and as is expected, the PlayStation 4 and Steam versions also feature trophies and achievements for even more to do. So, how does Metal SLug XX on PlayStation 4 stack up? Let's take a look. Metal SLug XX controls well enough on a basic level and feels as good as any other slug, but maybe isn't up to the task in parts where enemies are overly crowded, very swift, too spongy, and especially when cheaply placed. Input delay during two-player co-op is a serious concern. Metal SLug XX is needlessly hard in some places and poorly designed in others. Compared to a game like Metal SLug 3 or Metal SLug X, it feels less like a real challenge and more like death spam. The addition of branching paths and combat school challenges to Metal SLug 7's 7 stages gives XX some long legs for those that can overcome its inherent difficulty. The in-game visuals and backgrounds are all gravy, but the menus in combat school leave a bit to be desired. The weird faded border options are also kind of not great. An epic soundtrack, great fresh announcer, and classic sound effects make XX one of the best sounding slugs in the entire series. Even more so than X did with Metal SLug 2, Metal SLug XX piggybacks significantly off of other games in the series in addition to Vanilla 7, particularly X for its combat school, 3 for branching paths, and 6 for its expanded roster, unique character abilities, and scoring mechanics. As a download on the PlayStation Network or Steam, Metal SLug XX only weighs in at around $20 or so, which approaches moderate cost. Its features still make it worth it to us as big fans of the series, but this is ultimately not the best Metal SLug has been, and while its value is okay, it's not great. It's tough to be someone who loves this series but fails so miserably at playing its games, but XX is seemingly just spiteful. Still, this is a game that I want to at least try getting better at, if it's at all possible, and I did go back to XX and 7 alike frequently in the past. However, I definitely recognize that XX, for all of its audiovisual charm and varied characters, is outclassed by many others in the mainline series, especially from a stage design standpoint. As such, Metal SLug XX gets a 3.5 out of 5. You can get Metal SLug XX on Steam and PlayStation 4 today. The Xbox 360 version of the game is also compatible with modern Xbox Series systems, though Leona is a separate DLC purchase. However, it still costs less overall. Look, don't get me wrong, I still rather like Metal SLug XX. It just fucking hates me, that's all. Maybe one day I'll be able to overcome it. Or not, if my PS4 CMOS dies before then. That seems very likely. So how about another run and gunner, this time built for speed and efficiency? Cause Tanuki Justice is feeling pretty fine, and it's coming up next in episode 298 of Bullet Heaven. Then it's onto the Cosmic Deep with Astro Aqua Kitty in episode 299. See you all in the next episode.